Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid it is time for a funeral because Intel Core CPUs are dead. No, really they are. They have actually brought out the latest generation that launches today, and they're calling this Intel Core Ultra. So this is the new CPU, the flagship desktop gaming chip from Intel, the Intel Core Ultra 9 285K. There is no 9 in this name whatsoever. Why do they not call it the 295K or the 290 or something like that? Anyway, right out of the gate, I've got to say I'm pretty disappointed with the fact that the gaming performance of this, on average, is going to be roughly the same as what we saw on the 13th and the 14th generation. So unless you're upgrading from a really old rig, then these CPUs probably aren't going to give you a massive improvement. And because we do need new motherboards, it's not even like this is a drop-in improvement that you can do if you had a 12th gen either. But we're going to talk properly about it throughout this video anyway. And what we're going to do is build the most powerful Intel gaming PC that you possibly can. So it's going to be a really interesting video. Please join us along for the full ride right after a short word from this video sponsor. Razer's Blade 14 2024 is the do-it-all gaming laptop that oozes luxury. With its sleek, machined aluminium body, powerful components and portable design, the Blade 14 can be used for pretty much anything. And it comes sporting a GeForce RTX 4060 or 4070 laptop GPU and a Ryzen AI CPU. Thanks to Nvidia's 40 series architecture, you not only get jaw-dropping real-time ray tracing, but access to DLSS super resolution, DLSS FrameGen, and all of the Max-Q technologies to make your laptop run smoother than ever. Learn more today with the link down below. And actually this was a complete accident, but this is quite a good analogy for these new Intel CPUs. Oh, because one of the biggest changes that they've actually done this generation, hang on, bear with me. Because just as I am shedding my jumper, Intel are actually shedding a load of thermal output essentially by reducing the power consumption of these chips massively. It's all about efficiency this time, and this is something that they should have done ages ago really, because the problem is there's only so much power you can put into a CPU before it just gets, well, very loud and then very expensive to cool. And this was fine all the time that Intel had the best performance out there, especially when it comes to games. But recently, as we know, especially with the advent of Ryzen's X3D chips, those would just generated even more FPS and less heat. Unless you specifically needed loads and loads of cores, then Ryzen obviously has made a lot of sense for quite a long time. So I'm glad that they've actually reduced the power consumption massively, especially whilst gaming on these chips. But then the problem is, in the initial numbers that Intel have given us, it looks like the gaming performance is anywhere from worse with these new chips to quite a lot better. And it kind of averages out roughly at 0. We'll show you all the numbers a little bit later. I kind of wanted to have my cake and eat it. I wanted to have a chip that had the best gaming performance, but also use a lot less power. Because if you're a gamer, as we spoke about in the intro, I think this is potentially going to be a little bit of a hard sell, but we'll give this the benefit of the doubt, and obviously we'll wait until we see the numbers later so we can properly assess how it's going to perform. But I think that in the meantime, we should actually get this show properly on the road and actually talk about the motherboard, because these are always the unsung heroes really when it comes to a new CPU launch, because obviously half of it is going to be down to the chip, now the other half is the board that actually kind of holds everything together. This is the 890 carbon Wi-Fi, and there is at least quite a few new features actually on the latest generation of motherboards. Main ones really being things like Thunderbolt 4, Wi-Fi 7, loads of USB on the back of this as well. Nice to see that we actually have buttons to clear the CMOS, flash the BIOS, all of this good stuff. So it's going to be pretty future-proof as well. We do also have PCI Generation 5 on this, also on SSDs that we didn't get on the older generation of Intel motherboards. And of course, because this is a Z series motherboard, you can not only overclock the RAM, and we should be getting some insane speeds on this actually, but then also the CPU itself. And because the amount of heat that these chips generate by default is actually a little bit lower, it may well mean that we have quite a lot of overclocking headroom to play with. And as we place our board down on top of our box, you may start to notice a few things that are a little bit different this time around. The first one I've not seen on any board before, bar the other like 890 boards that we had in for benchmarking, and this also confused Carl, because when he got his RTX 4090 and he installed everything the way that he'd normally do, it wouldn't work. He was getting some weird errors, and it actually turned out that the problem was he wasn't using this 8-pin down here, because this actually supplies extra power to the PCIe. Yes, that's something to bear in mind. Obviously, you've got loads of headers and things down the bottom as well, so everything is pretty future-proof there. Very large VRMs, and then this is completely toolless as well, and then you can see that we can actually put an additional 4 SSDs down here. These are PCI Gen 4 4X slots. I mean, while we're here, why don't we actually get this SSD installed? Nice double-sided heatsink, and then we can pick up a brand new SSD that we haven't used before actually. This one is from Samsung. It is the 990 Evo Plus. Let's carefully get this inserted into the slot. No screwdriver required. But obviously we're going to open up this slot, and this is a new socket, but it does look very similar in size to the previous one. I mean, the physical size of the chip is going to be roughly the same as well. So there are going to be some skeptical people out there that will say, why don't they just keep the same socket for longer? They're just trying to make more money. I'm not going to disagree with you, but I'm not going to agree with you either. We're just going to leave that hanging in the air. And then actually we can do something that we don't often do on this channel, and that's use a faster kit of memory. And there's two reasons for this. Firstly, is because obviously this supports really fast memory kits and it should be nice and stable. But then also, because this is now going to get more standard, the prices of these fast kits should come down. We can then grab our Viper Gaming 7600 MHz C36 kit of RGB DDR5 memory and drop this down into position. This one is helpfully called the Extreme 5. I assume the 5 stands for DDR5. And then, okay, hang on a second, because you guys are almost certainly going to be confused with these next component choices, but just to explain, I've been sent a massive box of the new Lian Li fans, and I've been very keen to test them because these are actually wireless. So they're not truly wireless, you do need to obviously power them, but all of the controls done over with the USB receiver, and then you don't have as many cables around the back, and in theory it's going to be a lot easier to set up and use. But the cooler I had is a wired one, so I don't want to mix and match. So what we're going to do is mix and match something a little bit different. We're going to take this Deepcool LS720, we're going to do a bit of a Frankenstein build with it. We're going to use the fans from the Lian Li, but then the cooler from the Deepcool cooler, because that's going to be really nice and easy to plug in, and then we should just have a nice looking all-round rig. But the reason, of course, that I want to talk about this now is because in theory you can reuse a lot of existing coolers that you might already have with this new socket, but there's a couple of issues. The first one really is the fact that you're probably going to have different hotspots and things on the CPU, so even if they are compatible, they still might not be optimal. But then also, if you have a cooler, and don't quote me on this, I'm not 100% sure, but something like an Arctic that actually comes with a separate mount for the CPU itself, because the shape of the CPU is slightly different, I'm gonna guess it wouldn't work, or certainly wouldn't be optimal. The actual whole layout, I believe, is exactly the same. Just like that, look, you can see. No changes needed, goes in. The little plastic spacers go over the top, and then just to do a little test fit, this should then line up just like that and sit on top of the CPU. But now that we have our board set up, I think it's now time to actually press on to our case. And I've got to admit, I'm pretty excited for this one, because the only thing that I didn't really like about the original O11 Vision is that it was massive. So it was all very well building on this channel, but I think for my desk personally, I have massive speakers and I didn't want to have a massive PC as well. That was one of the few reasons really that it put me off using it for personal use, but otherwise I loved it. Now this kind of aims to solve that problem, because for a dual chamber case, this actually isn't too bad. This is considerably smaller than something like Corsair's 6500X. Yet it can still fit most of the same stuff in there really. I think the main compromise that you're going to get with this is if you already have a load of 140mm fans that you want to keep, then you're going to be a little bit disappointed because it's 120 only for the most part really. I mean, you can actually fit some 140s if you want to put them at the top, because by default this actually comes with a little mesh panel pre-fitted, but you get both inside the box, or at least I certainly did. But you can still fit like massive GPUs, which is the main consideration I think for most people. So you are going to have a fair bit of clearance as well. You can, it certainly looks like it anyway, actually fit stuff the other side of this. So if you want to do push-pull or something, then this is going to be quite a nice area to do it. Should be great for water cooling. Lian Li's always been good for that. But the thing I like about them is that they can work for everyone, not just like the mega high-end rigs. It might look a little bit odd to actually not put any fans down here at the bottom, so the list price on this is going to be a little bit deceptive because it doesn't come with any as standard, but obviously it's a beautiful case and you can grow into it over time if you're willing to not use all of the fans straight away. And obviously because it's dual chamber, should be pretty easy to actually build in. Actually, is this completely toolless? Yes, okay, that just comes off with no clips whatsoever. And then just like the old version, there you can see what I mean, ample room here if you want to put things there. You've got this little bar that you can attach SSDs and like fan hubs and things to if you want. Full-size hard drive cages down the bottom, power supply goes above that, plenty of room for cable management. So yes, this is going to be a very easy case I think to work with, as long as you have 120mm fans. Then we can of course pick up our motherboard. Everything is pre-applied here, so you pretty much come to expect that these days, but Lian Li are not letting you down. Oh, guys, how many times do I have to say I
Hate radiators.
Today, I'm past that. I'm just so deflated. I'm like...
I don't even get radiators today.
Essentially, the plan works, but there's quite a few limitations. So the main one is that if you put your graphics card in here, you can't have like a thick radiator and fan combination because there's just no clearance. So it's going to be fans only, a really short GPU, or what we're doing here today, you actually have the radiator round the back, and then you can flex the tubes through this little channel all the way into the main chamber, and then this comes out here. And I think this is actually more designed for one of Leon Lee's own coolers, like their Hydro Shift coolers that would work with this a whole lot better. But it is gonna work here today, but we're gonna have to do that dreaded thing of actually having the tubes at the top, which I've never done and I wouldn't recommend, because otherwise it's just going to kink the hose to the point where surely the risk of failure is gonna be far higher than actually having it in the less desirable way. Oh, and the fans, of course, I realise I've unboxed them and you haven't even seen them now. They're very easy to install actually, interlock together, no like screws or anything, like literally just bish bash bosh, and it was done. And then you just have a couple of cables that come out the top actually. And I kind of get what the whole ecosystem is supposed to do now actually. The idea is not necessarily to like reduce the amount of cables, it's to reduce the like thickness of the cables, because 3 fans, that's all you would need. So one goes to USB, and then I haven't seen this before, you have a fan header with 2 different cables on it. You have this little SATA to fan splitter here. That will connect up to 3 blocks at once actually. So there are still cables that go around the back, but the main thing you'll notice is that you don't have a hub anymore. That is the USB device that actually needs to go in the back. This is like the brain of your system, look. Compared to addressable RGB, obviously this is way, way better, but whether it's going to work as reliably, I'm not 100% convinced. Let's grab and connect our front panel connections though. Obviously we've got our USB 3, we have 2 on the top alongside a USB-C, and then we've got our HD audio and our front panel connection all merged into one. All of those cables are now connected, and my SSD seems to have died unfortunately in the overhead, so that's the end of that, but essentially everything just plugs in down the bottom. So we've got our front panel, USBs here, fan, addressable RGB, HD audio if you want it down the bottom left, but I don't even use that. As we're here, I think it's probably time to get our RTX 4090 installed. And as I say, this is the one I personally use. This is the PNY Accelerate Gaming. And to be honest with you, while it's not one of the bigger brands, it's worked absolutely fine. I've had no issues with it at all, to be honest with you. And actually, now that that GPU is in place, I won't be able to access that 8-pin down the bottom, so we're going to remove that. Forget I said anything. And actually, the power supply that we're using here today is very overkill. I've had this since the summer actually, but we haven't used it yet because we just haven't had a rig that's, I say needed it, I still don't think this needs 1,350 watts of power, but obviously very high end, gives you loads of overhead if you do want to upgrade this. And if the rumors are true about things like the 5090 using a lot of power, you're going to overclock this, you are going to use like a very heavy duty everything basically, then yes, I can see the appeal of having a higher wattage power supply, but don't go thinking like it's essential or anything. The main things really that you're looking for are enough power, good efficiency, bit of headroom, and if you can afford it, go for modularity so that you can actually have all of the cables that you need inside your rig and not all of them. This is one that actually does come with 2 12-volt high power connections on it. You are future-proof with this. Because it's dual chamber, it should go in very easily. Fan obviously facing to the side so it can actually get that ventilation through the case. We feed all of the cables that we need through, including this ATX here. We've got our, rather unusually actually, we've got our CPU right where we don't want it by these tubes. And then obviously we also had that 8-pin for PCIe that I've plugged in. I did have to take the fans out as I expected. And then everything else is actually pretty much good to go, bar the graphics card. So for real this time, even though this is the 3rd time I've actually put it in the slot whilst building this PC, we can line this up. Then we just want to grab the power cable and get this connected. Oh, and then actually, ladies and gentlemen, I feel exhausted. This has been a long one. We are actually complete, and I say that, but most of it was just trying to wrap my head around how to actually get the fans and the radiator in. Everything else was very straightforward, to be honest with you. There's a few weird things. Obviously, the PCI and the motherboard is new. That is going to cause problems with people and needing new power supplies. Cable grommets come out a bit easily on this, like when you push cables through. But my main complaint actually with this chassis is just that if you are going to use this in vision mode, then it's just a bit chinny really at the top. There's too much here, and not really that much that I think you can do with it unless you use that mesh panel. But actually cable management around the back was very, very easy as well. I mean, I haven't really done any. I've left the hard drive cages in as well. It's still got so much room, and the way it kind of hugs the cables, you don't even need to bunch them down or anything. Obviously make sure everything's connected in. Can even do push-pull very easily as well. Just screw a couple of fans in there. So I'm actually very, very pleased and very impressed with how easy this was. And I haven't even attached the bit that's meant to make your rig look even cleaner. There you go, that goes on like there, like that. And it's kind of like you haven't even built a PC. You've added a power supply, you've got a couple of cables here, but otherwise you would never know. I'm pretty impressed actually. But of course, the big question is, will this thing actually work? And if it does, will it work first time? Oh, and actually these are a little bit bowed. I need to screw those in better. And I must admit, I have no idea what the fans are gonna do because I've never used a system like this before. Do you need to like sync them together or do they just work? Let's find out. Oh wow, that's a lot. I didn't expect it to work like that straight out the gate. All of the fans are spinning apart from this one, but that one's bowed, so maybe that's just not connected properly. But yeah, that's quite something, isn't it? If you had just the one fan there, and you had the radiator at the top, I think that really would have looked better. But we're gonna stick with it for now. Oh. Do we have a signal? Oh, so our fans are kind of not doing much. Well, we're in the BIOS, that's good. Oh, yep, I set them to all full speed, and that seems to have fixed that. There you go. So yes, it was a power issue. So if you went into the BIOS, you could fix that without having to rely on the SATA, but I suppose it depends on the motherboard and the settings that you're gonna use. Oh guys, you know when everything just doesn't go your way, things don't work, and you really hope it will fix itself and it doesn't? Well, that's essentially the story of yesterday. It's been very, very frustrating. The good news is we got there in the end, but my word was it a nightmare. And essentially, it was all down to the Windows 24 H2 install because it just wouldn't work. It got into Windows after like bypassing the NRO and actually like installing the drivers separately. That was annoying. But then as soon as it kind of got access to the internet, a few minutes in, the whole thing would black screen and it was unbootable. Like, it would not work. So obviously I thought, well, this is a little bit of a bug. I updated the BIOS on the MSI board, didn't fix it. Reinstalled Windows from scratch, didn't fix it. Reinstalled Windows again, installed completely different software in a different order, still didn't work. The good news is though, I've had the opposite experience actually, with the RGB lighting software for the fans. It's amazing. Now that's not to say that there aren't any potential issues with this. The main one actually being that if you do want to sync all of the lighting together, it's fine as long as your ecosystem is the same, but because you can't actually sync this to things like your graphics card or your RAM or any addressable RGB devices, then obviously it's not going to be as easy to get everything in sync as if you're just using the motherboard headers and things. But I've got to say, this works really well. So all of the blocks of fans were automatically detected. I didn't have to do anything at all when it knew that this was a block of 2 and they were the normal ones and that these were the LCDs. You just click on the areas that you want to adjust. So here we've actually got all of our temps and things on the right hand side. You can have videos, GIFs, sensors, animations and things, but let's get into the games. And before you moan at me and say that I really need to play a little bit more of Star Wars Outlaws, I've been making these videos for you, leave me alone. So yes, this is still right at the start of the game, but this is actually going to be pretty good for our analysis really, because obviously we're running this with a 4090, so you should be able to get the highest possible settings really, and even without any frame gen, we've got this running at DLSS 4K balance, so you could use performance if you want. So yes, around about 112, 108 FPS or so at the moment, and this is actually running at Ultra as well, so this is no slouch when it comes to pretty much anything. There's actually a lot of ray tracing going on in here as well. Let's instead jump into NVIDIA RTX lighting, and we'll set this to medium. So this is almost like super ray tracing essentially. It's even more in depth than the one that's baked into the Ultra preset, and as you can see, that does now tank the frame rate quite a bit actually, to around about 72 FPS. But if you were going to use DLSS frame gen, especially if you're using a controller or something where you're not going to pick up on the latency quite so much, then this could be quite a good shout. But you can definitely notice that the lighting does improve actually. But anyway, pressing swiftly on, we can now move on to one of the best looking titles on PC. This is some Black Myth Wukong, and obviously with our 4090 we can run this at very high settings. I mean, quite literally actually. We actually got this set to cinematic, but then if you want to go to full path tracing, that is a level above this. And this is currently using the recommended settings, which is DLSS set to performance at 4K at that cinematic preset. preset, and I've got to say it's a really attractive game, and in terms of frame rate, as you'd expect with a 4090, no real issues, around about 115, 120 FPS or so, so it's running very well. And actually in terms of our thermals, I've got to say I am really impressed, and I'm glad Intel have made the change this time around for more efficiency. The system is still, well, it's silent at the moment. Like how ridiculous is that? Everything pretty, well, not the CPU now, but everything in terms of the graphics card is running flat out. CPU is having to do a lot of work, and yet we can have, as I say, a system that is completely silent. So whilst you may well be very happy with what you're getting, there could be better options out there, as we will discuss after 2 more games, because it's time for the multiplayer. And I think the best place to actually kickstart this testing is going to be arguably on the most demanding title when it comes to the CPU, Call of Duty Warzone, and I've got to admit, this is running ridiculously well. So it's quite often that we see very high frame rates in this title, where we're getting a lot of stutter, whereas so far I've not had anything like that at all. Now in terms of frame rate, we're running this at around about 175 FPS, so not the absolute highest I've ever seen from a 4090, but to be fair, we are running this with DLSS quality at 4K. So what we're going to do is turn the settings down just a little bit, and then we'll start to see what happens when we bottleneck our CPU. What is our high frame rate going to be? Well, you couldn't really make this up, could you? Because as soon as we swapped over to 1440p, the internet died, so we had to relaunch the title. But anyway, no matter, we're still in the game, just obviously a slightly different section. But at 1440p, exact same settings, I've got to admit that the frame rate is actually slightly higher than I thought it was going to be. Around about 235 to 240 FPS. As soon as we get into the city, it will dip nearer the 200 mark, but it's still holding up really, really well. And I mean, the telltale sign is going to be this number up here, our GPU utilization that's currently hovering around about 92% or so. So if that was at 98, we'd be seeing no bottlenecking from the CPU at all, but anything around about 80 to 95, or obviously lower than that, does show that you could get high frame rates with an even better CPU. And I guess to some extent it does depend whether your glass half empty or half full, because on one hand this is still an awesome gaming chip, but then obviously on the other, if you're buying something brand new, cutting edge, you are kind of expecting it to be the absolute best of the best, and the fact that you are still getting some bottlenecking on a graphics card that is about to be replaced doesn't necessarily bode all that well. Why would you want to specifically buy the best Intel CPU if it wasn't the absolute best? That is the thing that we're going to have to bear in mind. Productivity is a different thing, but this is a gaming channel, and this is supposed to be a gaming CPU. Oh, why? The main takeaway, anyway, is that I can't play Fortnite, and I'm really sad. But more importantly, don't buy anything at launch, really, because it's going to be at the absolute highest price. The price will start to come down, and obviously better drivers and issues that could arise will hopefully get discovered and get fixed, and especially with a Ryzen launch on the not too distant future, especially if you are going to be buying a gaming CPU for gaming, it makes sense not to jump in straight away and potentially have issues like this. But anyway, let's hand you over to some more important stuff with the hard benchmark numbers from the one and the only Bench Carl. Hope you haven't had these issues, Carl.
Well, it's funny you should say that, Marcus, because I have had a lot of issues. Hello everyone, it's me, Bench Carl, and I have had one hell of a week. I began testing last Thursday, and we have had multiple issues where our Cinebench numbers were so low, our Ultra 9 was being outperformed by a 12400F. We then received 3 different BIOS updates for our Z890 Asus Maximus Hero board, all of which didn't fix our issue. I continued to benchmark our other Ryzen and Intel CPUs, but it wasn't until about 9 PM last night we finally found the issue. Our Core Ultra 9 was getting terrible performance in every game we tested, but by enabling best performance within the Windows power management settings, boom, instant difference. In Counter-Strike 2, the 1% lows went from around the 32 FPS mark up to 200 plus. And no, that wasn't a mistake. It's worth noting that we've never used best performance before for any of our testing, and all our other CPUs were tested in the default balanced Windows power mode, as we like to keep our testing as real world as possible. So we could potentially see high performance with our other CPUs if they were also tested in best performance mode as well. So with our Core Ultra 9 295K no longer hampered by inconsistency and low performance issues, the overall performance in games still isn't fantastic. After speaking with Intel again this morning, it appears that there's some settings hidden within the BIOS on Asus motherboards that are disabled by default. Intel application optimization is enabled by default by most motherboard vendors, except currently ASUS. However, this will be changed in the next BIOS update. So whilst I've been doing my testing with an ASUS motherboard, this could be why Marcus didn't have any performance issues and was actually impressed with the smoothness he saw in Warzone. But this is exactly why you should watch these videos and reviews before purchasing or pre-ordering anything. If you had just paid £550 for a CPU and £300 plus for a motherboard and were seeing this kind of instability, you would not be happy. If I'm completely honest, I can't give you a proper performance review because in its current state with the tools we were given, we could not reach the performance numbers we were expecting to see. According to Intel, there's also core affinity issues within Windows 24 H2, which could be affecting performance, and they are working on a fix. What I can offer you though is some advice. Don't buy these CPUs on launch, wait for the issues to be resolved by Intel, and wait for reviewers to confirm when that's the case. The next few weeks for Intel could be pretty rough, especially with the 9800X3D being announced by AMD to come out within the next few weeks. If Intel can get things sorted though, the single-core and multi-core performance in Cinebench means that these could be fantastic for productivity, but only decent for gaming. Especially as these Core Ultra chips are a lot less power hungry, which is about the only real positive I can take from this past week of testing.
Dear oh dear then, eh? I'm actually filming this a few hours before embargo, and the honest truth is that we still don't know all of the issues and all of the remedies, if you like, to fix them. I mean, clearly, what's happened, in my opinion, is that it's been launched too early because there are all of these things that could have been ironed out if they'd either delayed the launch or just given themselves enough time. But the stupid thing is that AMD and Intel are almost competing with each other at the moment to who can launch first, and neither of them seem to be able to get their things right. I mean, this has not been a good launch for Intel. I think this is probably the worst launch I've actually been a part of in terms of the amount of issues, the amount of fixes, amount of BIOSes, and the fact that I've had issues with my MSI one. Carl's had issues with both of his ASUSes. Granted that we could get around those once we turned that high performance mode on, but we've now heard that apparently in Windows 24 H2, even selecting high power might not enable the full high power, and you have to go in the old control panel and enable it that way. You know, there's issue after issue after issue, and this is something that could have been avoided if they've just left it for a few more weeks. So clearly the takeaway for this is please don't buy these at launch. I mean, forgetting everything else, the stability issues alone, all of these fixes and patches and things, there's clearly going to be a lot more coming. It is not worth investing this on day one. It's just not. I mean, whether it's going to be worth investing in the long term, it depends really how much you value productivity, but surely if you value productivity, you're also very highly going to value stability. And if you're not getting that at the same time, well, then, you know, what can you say really? And this was borderline unreviewable. It was only thanks to Carl benchmarking till 11 o'clock last night to actually get some numbers to present to you that we were able to review it at all. But yes, launch, don't buy it. If you are interested, obviously wait a little bit. But my impressions so far, when I was actually gaming and when everything was working properly, seems pretty good. But again, relative to the other chips and with all of the other stability issues and the high launch cost, the fact you need a new motherboard, I don't really need to say anything else, do I? But let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed this video, please smash the like button, get yourself subscribed, and if you are interested in current pricing on anything that was featured in this PC, then you can find it listed down below. I mean, the fans were very good, weren't they? And while you're down there, why not take your games on the go with the incredible Razer Blade 14 2024. With its 240Hz, 1600p display, large 68Wh battery, this laptop offers razor-sharp gaming in a truly portable chassis. The combination of its powerful RTX 40 series GeForce graphics card and 8-core Ryzen AI CPU lets you fly through work and productivity by day and then be your best gaming self by night. Learn more about the Blade 14 2024 today with a link down below. But thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.